The infamous sides of World War I between the Entente and the Central Powers haven't always been guaranteed. There's always a few nations that wanted to join another side, and there's just one great power who wanted to go their own lane, but was forced to cooperate with the Western powers instead. This great power I'm talking about is Russia. So why did they cooperate with the Western powers and form the Entente instead of going their own lane? Well, first, Russia throughout their imperial history has always been a bit of an outcast to their European neighbors. Nations such as the Ottoman Empire, Austria, and Britain thought that Russia was going to dominate Eastern Europe or something and conquer Constantinople or something like that. This led to incidents such as the Great Game between Britain and Russia, or during the Russo-Japanese War, where Britain diplomatically supported the Japanese war effort. So taking all that into consideration, why didn't Russia form their own path during World War I? Well, it was a few things. First of all, they signed the Franco-Russian Alliance between them and France in 1894. Later in 1907, they signed a treaty with Britain, which basically divided Iran into their respective spheres of influence, with Russia having influence in the north and Britain having influence in the southeast. This led to the formation of the Triple Entente between France, Britain, and Russia in 1907, which was made to be a bulwark against German imperialism. So what if World War I was a three-way war between the Franco-British Entente, the German Central Powers, and the Russian faction? Well, that's the question we're going to answer today in this alternate history. Well, first, we're going to have to change three key things in order to have Russia form their own path during World War I. The first key thing we're going to change here is how France and Russia never signed an alliance in 1894. This could be because France might be distrusting of Russia and they might grow too powerful, or it could be Russia still holding a grudge against France and the Western powers for supporting the Ottoman Empire against Russian action during the Crimean War. Another key thing we'll change here is have the Anglo-Russian Alliance never exist in 1907. This alliance basically ended Anglo-Russian rivalry in Central Asia and basically ended the Great Game, so we're just gonna snap that alliance out of existence. The third and final key change we'll make is have the Russians win against Japan during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. This will make nations such as Britain be more skeptical and afraid of Russian expansionism in Europe and especially Asia, thus having the Anglo-Russian Alliance of 1907 never exist at all. So now finally we get to the interesting part of this video. Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot in the head in Bosnia, igniting World War I. Things go the same way as it did in our timeline. Austria declares war against Serbia, Serbia asks for Russian support, Russia declares war against Austria-Hungary, Austria asks for German support, and then Germany declares war against Russia. But what doesn't go the same way as it did in our time is Germany declaring war on France yet. This is because Russia hasn't signed an alliance between France or Britain yet, which will make World War I, for now, just an Eastern European war. Another thing that we have changed here is that since Russia won against Japan during the Russo-Japanese War, Germany doesn't have to change its plans on attacking Russia first, then France, since Germany still views Russia as a bigger threat to German influence in Europe and the entire globe. So I'll split this alternate World War I into three: a Entente victory scenario, a Russian victory scenario, and finally a Central Powers victory scenario. But first, if you're liking my content so far, consider subscribing. Here are some videos that I'll make in the near future, so if you want to see them, hit that subscribe button. Anyways, back to the scenario. Starting off with an Entente victory scenario, we'll have things basically go the same way as it happened in our timeline, with Italy joining the Entente in 1950 and with Romania doing the same thing in 1916, and having Russia collapse into a civil war in the east in 1917. But instead of just having the civil war happen, just like it did historically, the West is actually going to directly intervene on the White Army's side during this civil war, declaring war against the Bolsheviks. This could see Bolshevik Russia joining forces with the Central Powers, at least indirectly, because they both have the same enemies, the White Russians and the West. Eventually, one by one, each Central Powers nation such as Bulgaria, the Ottomans, Austria, and eventually Germany will all surrender sometime in 1918, leading to the Western Entente winning World War I, or so they thought. Since they directly intervened in the Russian Civil War, unlike in our timeline, kind of, they still have to fight a war in Russia against the communists. The West will actively try to install a friendly Western puppet into Russia. But since this section of the video is the Entente fully winning World War I, let's say that the war ends in a white Russian victory, with a Republican Russian government being installed. This Treaty of Versailles will be the exact same as our Treaty of Versailles, except in the east, Ukraine, the Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia are officially recognized as independent states. Russia, as stated before, will be under a pro-Western Republican government, under a democracy. I say democracy very, very loosely here. And also Russia loses their influence in Iran to the British. Now we move on to the Russian imperial victory scenario. For this to happen, we need to change a lot, and I do mean a lot of things in order for this scenario to actually work. But for the sake of this video, we're just gonna change a few things, such as Russia rapidly industrializing, building up their military much faster, and having much more competent generals in power. We also need the Central Powers and Entente generals to be a lot more incompetent than they were in our timeline, especially the German ones. I won't explain into too much detail on how Russia could possibly win World War I, but since these Russian generals are a lot more competent than they were historically, we need Russia to hold off the Austro-Hungarian and German advances into their territory, and we can have Russia capture much more of Galicia and Austria and capture more of Germany's eastern territories. This will make the Entente defeat the Germans much earlier than our own timeline, and will make Russia eventually focus on their historical enemies, the British and the French too, I guess. Most of the fighting after the German surrender would occur in Germany, with Russia supporting separatist movements in Saxony and Bavaria, and Britain and France supporting the Republicans in Germany. Russia would also invade Constantinople, greatly escalating the Turkish War of Independence. So them and France would eventually agree to a ceasefire with the Russians. In the peace terms, Germany would be divided into multiple spheres of influence between the British, French, and Russian. Britain would regain influence in Hanover, France would gain influence across the Rhine, Baden, and Württemberg, for now at least. Bavaria and Austria will likely be buffers between the French and Russian spheres in Germany. And speaking of the Russian sphere in Germany, Saxony, Brandenburg, and Mecklenburg will be under the Russian sphere of influence. A new Czechoslovak state will annex Silesia, and Russia will annex some territories out of Germany. In the Balkans, Austria-Hungary will fully collapse as it did in our timeline, but instead, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, and Hungary, for now, will be in the Russian sphere of influence. But as a compromise, Greece and Bulgaria will be under the Western sphere of influence. The Treaty of Sevres will be successfully implemented, unlike in our own timeline, with Turkey being mostly colonized between the Western powers, but instead of an independent Armenian state. Russia will just take Armenia for themselves. And now we move on to the most boring part of this scenario, a Central Powers victory scenario. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, I'm not gonna waste your guys' time. This will be the exact same as those other fucking Central Powers victory scenarios to ever come across YouTube. So let me just real quick. Boom. Russian breakaway states in the east, blah blah blah. The Balkans being consolidated between Bulgaria and Austria, blah blah blah. The Ottoman Empire surviving and influencing most of Arabia, blah blah blah. Britain not losing too many of their colonies, blah blah blah. France's colonial empire being partitioned between Germany and their allies, blah blah blah. Germany creating Middle Africa, blah blah blah. This is probably the second most popular alternate history scenario to ever exist across YouTube. So I hope you guys enjoyed the alternate history scenario. Make sure you guys subscribe to this channel and also my second channel, which will be in the comments and description down below. Also, make sure you guys follow my TikTok and Twitter, which will also be in the comments and description down below. This has been Awesome History, and adios, amigos!